Hey YouTube, Andy here. This is going to be a review of Robin Hobb's Ship of Magic, which is the first book in her Liveship Traders Trilogy, which is usually accepted as the second trilogy in her Realm of Elderlings series. It takes place in that same world. This book, however, is not really connected to the Farseer trilogy, which was the trilogy just previous to this. There's no overlapping characters. It is in the same world, and there's some references to the Six Duchies, but that's about it at this point after book one in the series. So if you're coming looking for more fits, it's not going to be in here. However, that said, the excellence that you find in the Farseer trilogy, in my opinion, you're only going to find in greater displays in this Ship of Magic, book one in the Liveship Traders Trilogy. I'm going to tell you right here at the beginning, this is going to be a rave review. I loved this book, think it's a masterpiece, and am gobsmacked that this book is not talked about more in terms of all-time greats. And that sounds like an exaggeration. It is not. I was excited about this because I loved Farseer. I think Robin Hobb is a tremendous writer. And so I was very interested, obviously, coming to this next trilogy. And even with those high expectations, I was blown away. So here's how I'm going to break down this rave review. The first, probably not fully half, but maybe like third of the video is going to be a why you should read this, because I'm assuming that there's going to be a lot of people who haven't read this book who are watching this review. So that's obviously going to be spoiler free. I'm not going to mention any particulars of the plot or anything like that. So that'll be kind of a spoiler free review, but more trying to get you guys to read this because I think it's so damn good. The latter half, as usual, is going to be a spoiler review where I talk specifics in terms of characters and themes, what I like and how they develop. I don't feel I can do that well without talking spoilers, so that is going to be spoiler filled, and I will of course give you a warning before I transition to that point of the video. Real quick, before I get to my 5 reasons you should read Robin Hobb's Liveship Traders Trilogy, or at least this book, I haven't read the other two, just this book. Let me give you a basic plot overview. It's hard to get deep into this plot without spoilers or describing things in great detail, but suffice to say, the basic idea around this world is it is a far colony of a greater country called Bingtown. The greater country is called Jamalia. I think I'm saying that right. I haven't looked up how to say any of these things. Certain families can build ships from something called wizard wood, and if 3 generations of a family live and captain these ships and then die upon its decks, it will literally come to life. It will be a live ship, hence the name of the trilogy. And this leads to prosperity, and it also ties into a mystery of some kind about this area that Bingtown is in called the Cursed Shore. And I don't want to say more about that, but live ships are very important for the commerce of that area for reasons that will become apparent in the reading. And we follow this family, the Vestreet family, as their ship is about to quicken, as it's called. And there are so many politics going on, both in the wider world, in the relationship between Jamalia and Bingtown, but also between the different live ship trader families, and how generations are changing there, and who gets control of the live ship, and how this live ship is going to come alive, because it literally becomes a character in the story. That's all I'm going to say now, because there are so many great aspects of this story that I don't want to ruin for you. But I think even in that description, you can get the unique elements that are going to be coming into this story that you have not read before. So definitely pick up this book. And here I'm going to give you 5 reasons that you definitely should right now. First, the writing itself. I mentioned I love Hobb as a writer. I want to flesh that out a little bit more. She has a nobility to her prose that reminds me of a Tolkien. It's a little bit more modern. Don't get scared off by that. I know some people aren't huge fans of Tolkien's writing, although I am. But I'm not talking specifically about like just a one-to-one comparison. That when you read Tolkien, there is a gravitas. There is, I like the word nobility to the way that he writes. And in some ways, even in the dialogue, there's a formality. And it's not unbelievable, and it still has well-rounded characters, but there is that sort of high fantasy, for lack of a better way of saying it, feel about the writing style. And Hobb shares that. So if you are a huge fan of like Patrick Rothfuss or a Tad Williams, Robin Hobb, in my opinion, is in that tradition and actually, again for me, surpasses it a little bit. Almost poetic, but still incredibly readable. I flew through this work. It's a joy to read, from her descriptions to her dialogue to the thought processes of her individual characters and how it changes slightly and you understand the world view, to her world building. Everything is just tremendous. I love her as a writer, and again, I think she needs to be talked about way more than she is. 2, Hobb's world building in this work is phenomenal. It far surpasses for me the Farseer trilogy. I think because of the Farseer trilogy, you are confined to one character, obviously. It's in the first person. You're hearing about this from Fitz. This work is from many different perspectives across the world in many different areas, and so you get to feel like a lot more is happening and connected to a lot more of the wider world. When I talk about world building, I want to distinguish that from something that I call scene building. Scene building is sort of you build the world enough so that where the characters are and how they interact and speak with one another makes sense. You set the stage. So on a movie scene, this is called a facade, and it's those buildings where you just build one wall, but once you go through the door, it's not a real building. It doesn't have any other walls, it doesn't have any rooms inside of it. It's just a facade so that when you're filming the outside scene, the background of the scene makes sense because there's a building there, but it's just a facade. I feel like most fantasy authors do that. Even good fantasy authors like a Brandon Sanderson, and this might be controversial, Joe Abercrombie, I think do this really well. They make a world enough so that their story works. But excellent world builders, and in my sense, excellent fantasy writers, make the whole world real, and you feel that as you're reading it, even if it's not necessary for each scene you're in. So rather than having a facade, for me, Robin Hobb, you go into that building, and there is a building there. And not only that, there's a distinct layout. And not only that, but in each room, there are detailed furniture and pictures and books with other stories in them, and there's an album, a family album, and you open it and there's pictures of 12 generations past. I'm getting a little poetic here and losing my metaphor a little bit, but I think you get what I'm saying. The world is fleshed out all over the place from all different angles that you, the reader, can see it, and it's tremendous. This world is unique, and each time that there is something revealed, there's such depth to it, even to the 800th page. 3, Robin Hobb has no flat characters. All of her characters are incredibly well-rounded. And what's amazing about this is she often chooses to do somewhat tropey or cliched characters from other fantasy genres, but then she makes them so well-rounded, she gives them such realistic hopes and dreams and desires and motivations that she turns what would be a trope in anyone else to this fleshed out amazing character. Like, there is a small childish girl who makes stupid decisions. How often have we seen that? But she's given such depth of character and motivation, even from a childish perspective, that it's believable. And it's a true character. I don't want to go on too much because there might be some spoilers in there, but every character is like that. Even the villains are so clear their motivations and clear their desires and why they're doing what they're doing. Oh, all of them are so good. 4th reason that you should read this book, it will make you feel emotions like nothing you've experienced before. I don't know how Hobb does this. Truly, I think she does this better than any other author in the fantasy genre. I feel things when they happen to her character. And part of this is that she is brutally honest with how decisions would play out in her world, both in ways that are like encouraging, but mostly in ways that are devastating. When a character makes a bad choice, they get all of the consequences heaped upon them in true fashion. Through that whole journey that all of these characters go on, I feel it. When something happens that is tragic, I truly get sad, get defeated, get depressed. But on the opposite end, when they do something that is well and they're starting to be respected, I am so elated. It just keeps me page after page after page invested into this story because it is so good. This is something I did recognize from the Farseer trilogy, where things that would happen to Fitz affected me so strongly, and that's true as well in Ship of Magic and the Liveship Traders. But now there's not just one main character and perspective character, but 7 or 8 or 9, and you're feeling those emotions multiplied by that many more scenarios, and it is just a thing to behold. Absolutely brilliant. Fifth and final reason that you should read this book: the themes are so deep, are so clever, are so profound in this work. Ranging from religious concepts to issues around sex and race and history to simple coming of age themes, anything that Hobb touches turns to thoughtful gold. And it is, again, a delight to read. This book is good in every single technical detail I can talk about. Characters, plot, prose, planning, pacing, everything is just to a 10. And I was very hesitant to give it a perfect grade because recently on this channel I've given 2 other books I've read, Toll the Hounds and The Crippled God, both Malaz and Book of the Fallen's, perfect 10s. And I know I always kind of shake my head when I see reviewers start giving out perfect grades more than they should. But the more I thought about it and give it like a 9.5 or a 9, I was just making up problems I had with it because I didn't want to give a perfect grade, and I don't want to live like that. If something's good, I want to say it's good. So this is gonna maybe cause some of you to not trust me, but I'm just going with my review instincts. Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb is a 10 out of 10. It's fantastic, glorious, incredible, fantasy as it should be written. I would strongly recommend it if you've never read Robin Hobb before. I think it's totally okay, and in fact, I would recommend starting with Ship of Magic before Farseer Trilogy. Actually, let me amend that. Depends what kind of fantasy reader you are. I enjoy multi-perspective, large world stories. If you are like me and really enjoy things like Malazan or Game of Thrones, these multi-perspective, higher fantasy epics, I think Ship of Magic is a good place for you to start Robin Hobb, because it has that same feel, but is unique in a lot of its aspects. However, if you like more personal stories and sticking with maybe 1 or 2 main characters, then I would recommend the Farseer Trilogy. If you like, again, Patrick Rothfuss's Name of the Wind, I think The Assassin's Apprentice, which is the first book in the Farseer, is a good place to start Hobb. Both are very good trilogies. Well, I've read the whole Farseer trilogy. I haven't gotten here yet. I can't imagine this gets worse, as this was an excellent work. So that's it for my spoiler-free review. If you haven't read this book yet, hop off and go read this book. Put it at the top of your TBR, or maybe after the series you're doing now, read it immediately. It is so, so good. Oh, please, please, please do that, and then come back and watch this video and say what you think about it in the comments below. Now it's just us who've read it before. I can finally give some spoilers. What I want to do here is go through each of kind of the main characters and both just give like a basic impression of what I thought of them, but then also their wider themes, because I think, again, I think what Hobb is doing in this trilogy is amazing. So let's start somewhere you guys would not expect, and that is the villain of this story, which I take to be Kyle. I hate Kyle Haven with a deep and dark hatred that I didn't know I had inside of me. It is probably, I should say he is probably, one of the best villains ever written. Every choice he makes my skin crawl with utter hatred. I mean, truly, awful. And I think the amazing thing about this is the early perspective shots we get in Kyle gives us an understanding of why he is making the choices he makes, and why his arrogance, why his selfishness and cruelty makes sense to him as a character. And authors almost never give this to us, and yet we have it. For just one split second, I was maybe coming over to Kyle's side, and then immediately I was like, wait, no, of course this is wrong. And of course, even more strongly, we see his manipulation of Kefria and why she as a character would allow herself to be basically walked all over on by him. And this is also due to Ronica and the way she has chosen to raise her children. It's just so, even the family dynamics in this work are so complicated and are so true to real life tragedy. It's brilliant. What I really love is that the main villain in this whole thing is toxic masculinity, which, if for some reason you have trouble with that phrasing, all I mean by that is traditional views of manhood, like toughness and strength and lording things over women, and being very touchy about showing weakness or emotion. Those things and sexism. Those are two ideas that have wrapped themselves around Kyle in every single part of his being, and that is what causes him to mistreat his wife, mistreat his son, who is amazing, Wintro, and his sister-in-law, and to destroy the ship, and to even do such terrible things as trading in human lives and slavery. And the way that Hobb writes this is incredible. It's not a thin, like, oh, men are bad and women are smart or anything like that. It is showing the depth of horror that sexism can inflict on people through this villain of Kyle and the society as a whole. I think is brilliant. And opposite to that, Althea, as our heroine, is on the receiving end of this completely unjust and sexist system. And we feel the injustice of what it would be like to be her and to suffer at this. And especially for a white man like me to be able to feel those emotions that I, in the real world, haven't felt because of who I was born to be and the society that we are in, is powerful as a reader. And to be able to get me to feel that as an author is both impressive from a skill perspective and important from a life perspective. Not only that, but that's not all that Althea does in the story. She also does indeed grow, and she learns of her own privilege as a rich daughter of a merchant, and she learns the value of respect, and she learns hard work, and she does improve in those things and sort of gains a better sense of herself. It is a true coming of age story. I think we throw that around too much just when like characters get older, not when they actually do hard things to grow up. And both Althea and Wintro, which I'm going to get to in a moment, have the hard circumstances that who they really are and growing into themselves as adults and full independent people puts them at odds with their parents and what they have envisioned for them. And that is a true trial that most people have when they grow. Or they have the same problem as Kefria, where they never really have that conflict, and so they've never really thought to be their full person, and so when they have to do that as an adult, it becomes difficult, and that puts them in hard circumstances. So these complicated things are all so well woven into the fabric of this tale. And then on top of this tale are the incredible elements. I love the idea of Bingtown. I love the idea of a live ship, and the way that Hobb brings character to Vivicacia. I don't know if that's how you say it. That's how I say it in my mind, Vivicacia. And her bond to both Wintro and Althea. Oh, when Althea has the live ship taken from her, it's so brutal. When Wintro gets the slave tattoo, when he makes wise choices and is still punished for them. Oh, okay. I'm not done yet going through the main characters. Let's talk about Wintro, because I think, as I said before, he also goes through these real coming-of-age trials, but also he is having this religious experience that I think is really well explored in the work. Both he struggles against what I would call the fundamentalist impulses of religious people, and that is holding to their religion in such a tight way that they disregard the world, or which wish to disengage or get away from the world. And there's one beautiful passage where Wintrow talks about this, where someone says, oh, it's Sa's will about slavery, and he pushes back at them and says, no, I think Sa gives us many gifts, but we make the choices of morality. And so he doesn't want easy answers in religion, and that's because he's being forced into the real world. He's not in a monastery anymore, and he has to deal with these sailors, and he has to deal with the hard questions of living in the real world and trying to live up to this religion, this Sa religion, which seems to have at it a lot of good elements of goodness and all humans being called to true goodness and to make things better and more beautiful. I think that's a great idea of what religion can be, and yet with a realization from both Wintrow and obviously Hobb, who's writing this, that even good aspects like that, if taken in an extreme fundamentalist way from a religious perspective, can turn things poorly. And we see that in both Wintrow's, like how he starts out with and where he ends. Kennett, I think, is a amazingly interesting and complicated character because he's a bad guy. Like he is, and I think he will be as the series goes forward, still filled with terrible qualities and really hateful in many ways. Sexist, elitist, selfish, violent, angry, and yet it's interesting that his whole storyline is really learning how powerful goodness is and a cause can be, even for the most bottom-dwelling kind of person. I love this idea of like a bad character sort of slowly being called to the light because he's realizing that's a better way to live life. I don't know if that's going to be his ultimate character growth, but it's such an interesting character choice that we hardly ever see. We see a lot of good characters being tempted or deformed in their goodness because they want to reach their goals and they'll do anything for them. We hardly ever see the opposite, where an evil person or someone with bad goals is slowly turned to being a good person because that's the way to achieve their goals. And that's what's happening with Kennett. I think the character of his, I don't know what you would call them now, not really Kennett's whore anymore, but Edda and her whole instinct and how the wizard word charm on his wrist is like more noble than him and is sort of his noble nature taking over. There's just so much complexity there that I love. I love the way that slavery and the horrors of that system are so well embedded in this plot. I think very often fantasy authors are afraid of that theme because in our real world, it's one of the greatest crimes in the history of humanity. Doesn't shy away from the horrors of this slavery and the smell and the bile and the awfulness of degrading humans so that you justify the economic benefit that they bring. I love that she doesn't shy away from the economic selfishness of slavery, not just the immorality of it, although that is certainly there. And finally, I mentioned already Ronica and Keffria, but I especially am and Malta. I think everything going back in Bingtown, I think shows both the disadvantages of blindly holding to tradition, and especially if the flaws in that tradition. I think Kyle shows that, and also with the decisions that Ronica has made to allow Kyle and Keffria to inherit the vast majority of the inheritance because, you know, that would look better to the Bingtown traders, even though it was clearly the wrong choice. But at the same time, we also see the strengths of holding to tradition if there is positives in it. So it's not an uncritical view of tradition, and it's not a simply critical view of tradition. It's more complicated because there are aspects of tradition that need to be held to, and that's why Kyle doesn't understand live ships and the things around that, or why the Rain Wild River is a or Malta, why she shouldn't just open this dream box, or all of these things. Like, you need to learn from the wisdom of the past, but not do so uncritically. Both the value and yet potential error in tradition. And I love that, as in all of these themes, none of these are easy and simple and thin. They're all deep with many different facets and ways that we interact with these ideas through different characters. This book is so good. I love it so much. I'm so excited to read the next one, to get to the next mystery, to find out more about Malta's character growth. I don't know if she's going to continue to be this terrible, rotten child, or she is going to learn humility through this love story. I can see that happening. I'm very interested to see if Vivacia is going to work within the Kennett and Wintro storyline. There's just so much that could happen, and because how I know Hobb writes these stories, so much that can happen. This book is phenomenal. Again, a masterpiece. I think immediately this is going to hop into my top 10 fantasy of all time. Obviously, I'm going to wait for those final judgments till I finish the trilogy, but so good. Robin Hobb, thank you for writing this. Love it. As I mentioned, a perfect 10 out of 10. Have you read Ship of Magic? Let me know in the comments what you think. If you haven't, please read it. As always, first in, last out.